Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep week 22 going with today's Tolkien Tuesday. Now, for all of Series 3, we've been going back to Tolkien's youth and, more often than not, the story of the TCBS. Now, specifically, I've been diving into the incredible research and really deeply human storytelling of John Garth from his must-read Tolkien and the Great War. Now, before I take a look at his work again, I want to remind you, please, check out his website. It's johngarth.co.uk. Not only can you get your copy of Tolkien and the Great War there, but you can also get other works of his like Tolkien at Exeter College or the gorgeous volume, The Worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien. And of course, you can get the audiobook version of Tolkien and the Great War, which John Garth narrates himself. Now, last time we talked about Tolkien returning to King Edward's during Christmas break of 1911, as well as the profound loss of TCBS member Vincent Trout right after the new year of 1912. Today, we're going to lean on Carpenter's biography and Garth's Tolkien and the Great War to bring us through most of 1912. Now, Carpenter moves us forward to the summer break of 1912, and that's when Tolkien spent 2 weeks at camp with King Edward's horse, which Carpenter describes as a territorial cavalry regiment in which he had recently enrolled. But John Garth, not in Tolkien and the Great War, but his excellent follow-up work, Tolkien at Exeter College, explains this in a bit more detail, noting that one of the school activities had been the Officer Training Corps, and 1 in 3 Exonians, as students at Exeter were known, joined the university OTC, but college rules directed Tolkien and 6 or 7 other colonials born overseas to a part-time cavalry regiment, King Edward's Horse. That is, because Tolkien was born overseas in what was then the Orange Free State, he was directed to King Edward's Horse instead of the Officer Training Corps. And that 2-week camp was no picnic, though Carpenter says that Tolkien enjoyed the experience of galloping across the Kentish plains. He adds that it was a wet and windy fortnight, and the tents were often blown down in the night. Garth substantiates that, saying that the camp coincided with severe gales which leveled nearly every tent. Now, I don't know about you folks, but getting my tent blown down every night, especially when it's raining, sounds like, well, decidedly not fun, but okay. Now, Carpenter records that Tolkien at school was getting into lazy habits, and that without Father Francis to watch over him, he found it all too easy to stay in bed in the mornings, particularly after sitting up late, talking to friends, and smoking in front of the fire. Tolkien himself wrote that the first year or two of his time there went by with practically none or very little practice of religion, as Carpenter also reports. But Garth sheds a little bit more light on that, though, saying that Tolkien's daughter Priscilla explained that Tolkien was intensely scrupulous when it came to his religious practice, and that he tended to self-criticism over the slightest lapse. Now, he also kept a diary for Edith, one in which Carpenter says he recorded all his misdemeanors and failings. But recall that he still was not permitted to see her, or even to write to her, until January 3rd, 1913, the day he turned 21. This was still many months away, and it must have felt like years to Tolkien. Now, Carpenter tells us that it was around this time that Tolkien discovered the Finnish language. He'd been interested in learning more about it after having read the Kalevala in English, but with the aid of a Finnish grammar book at the Exeter College Library, as Carpenter says, he began an assault on the original language of the poems. In letter number 163 to W. H. Auden, Tolkien wrote about this, saying, "Most important, perhaps, after Gothic, was the discovery in Exeter College Library, when I was supposed to be reading for honor mods, of a Finnish grammar. It was like discovering a complete wine-cellar filled with bottles of an amazing wine of a kind and flavor never tasted before. It quite intoxicated me, and I gave up the attempt to invent an unrecorded Germanic language, and my own language, or series of invented languages, became heavily Finnicized in phonetic pattern and structure." Now, we talked about that unrecorded Germanic language a few Tolkien Tuesdays ago, but this Finnish grammar led him to give that up and then influenced his own language. Well, this own language he's referring to is, as you might have guessed, what would eventually become Quenya, or the language spoken by the High Elves. In a paper on the Kalevala that he read to one of his college societies, he spoke about the importance of the kind of myths that were found in it. Carpenter quotes him as saying, "These mythological ballads are full of that very primitive undergrowth that the literature of Europe has, on the whole, been steadily cutting and reducing for many centuries, with different and earlier completeness among different people," adding, "I would that we had more of it left, something of the same sort that belonged to the English." As Carpenter says, perhaps he was already thinking of creating that mythology for England himself. Now, next week, we'll take a look at his Christmas 1912 break that he spent with his Incledon relatives. That would be his cousins, Edith's sister's daughters, Mary and Marjorie, along with a very important development in Tolkien's love life in the first few days of 1913. But for now, folks, this wraps up Tolkien Tuesday. And if you don't own a copy of Tolkien and the Great War, take care of that right now by going to johngarth.co.uk. And please consider backing John's future work by supporting him on Steady. I'm proud to do so, and I hope you will consider it as well. And please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support this show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Word Nerd Wednesday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And if you're listening to this on a podcast app, please be sure to follow or subscribe. And follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.